Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join Chris and I. For those of you I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Matt. I work with MonkeyPod. We're a software provider for nonprofit organizations. But today is not meant to be a sales pitch or anything like that. We're really going to turn it over to Chris to help us navigate the wild world of individual fundraising. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat throughout the conversation, so feel free to put any questions in there. And like I said, at the end, we'll kind of open things up to a little bit more of a Q&A session back and forth, all that kind of stuff. But if you have any questions or technical issues or anything like that, feel free to drop that in the chat. And then, like I said, once we get to the end of the call, we'll open things up to a little bit more of a dialogue. So, without further ado, I'll pass it off to Chris.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And before I attempt to share screen, I'll give you my two of my promises as a presenter. The first is that I will not say good morning and then make you say good morning, and then I say you can do better than that, and you say I won't do that. It demeans us both. We're not going to do that. Secondly, there will be a point in the presentation wherein I'm going to knock my microphone over. It happens every time. I'm a half Italian ancestry, so a lot of hand talking going on. It's gonna happen. See if you can catch it when it happens. It doesn't make a lot of noise, but there'll be a moment. So, with those caveats put in place, let's get going. Today, we are going to talk about building or growing an individual giving program. Obviously, individual giving is at the heart of what we do in the nonprofit space, but it is often misunderstood. And it's often seen as kind of like a dangerous or risky thing to do, or I don't know, a lot of myths about it. We're going to get into all of that as we go. The PDF of the presentation will be shared. Matt already mentioned we're going to also share the recording of the video. We will have time for questions at the end, and please feel free to use the chat as we go. Today, we're really going to look at some of the key components of individual giving. We're also going to make the case for individual giving. If you're on this call, you probably don't need this case, but all of us have beloved boards and bosses who have varying degrees of comfort with fundraising, and sometimes we need to remind them why it's so important we invest in our individual donors. We're going to talk about donor discovery and the importance of and tactics to create a prospect list to help guide our activities. And we're going to talk about some goal setting. What are some of the goals we should be looking at when we're talking about individual donors supporting our mission? A little bit about me. My name is Chris Bayaki. I have a master's in organizational leadership and a CFRE, which is a nice way of saying that I love nonprofit work. I've been in the nonprofit space for 25 plus years, background in journalism and corporate communications, and I've worked for big shops and small shops and everything in between. I really believe that philanthropy is a remarkable industry to work in. It's more than its fair share of challenges, but it's also something really magical about giving people a chance to make the world better. I'm a certified leadership coach and have been on my own at Resolute Philanthropy for about 2.5 years now, helping nonprofits build confidence and clarity in their fundraising. In the chat, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear a little bit more. I know we've got some where people are located from, but if you want to share anything about your organization, your mission, I'd love to hear that. I also love to hear about a piece of art that brings you joy. Piece of art can be a book, a song, a movie, a play, however you want to define art is a-okay with me. And I ask this question, especially on days like this when the news is giving us a lot of reasons to be sad or to be nervous or to be all of the above. And I believe it's important to kind of recenter on joy every now and again. Two caveats before we get into the nitty-gritty of the presentation. First off, a word about scaling. When I worked for Habitat for Humanity of Orange County, I would often sit in presentations at regional or national conferences, and I would hear about things and think, oh, I can't do that because this presenter has a bigger organization with a bigger budget, and I would kind of despair. But what I learned is that it's really all about scaling. It's all about listening to these presentations and figuring out what elements could I bring back to my shop. So if there's ideas or concepts presented here that you think, oh, I can't do that because, I encourage you to take a breath, take a step back and see, are there elements or nuggets that you can pull out of this? To bring back to your shop, to bring back to your mission. Secondly, a word about privilege. I am a white male, straight, cis male with a bow tie and a beard and 2 college degrees and a significant amount of privilege that I use when I walk around the world. And I have attempted, as in all things, to create a presentation that will reach you where you are. If you find that things in this presentation are not quite there for you, or if you would like me to maybe reframe or rethink some of my word choice, I'm very much open to those ideas and concepts. Okay, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is about our mindset and how we think about fundraising and how we think about the work we do. And the first mindset I really encourage people to embrace when we're in this fundraising, in this individual giving space, is to think about fitness as opposed to construction. When we think about construction, we think about something that we have done once and it is done. If I want to build a house, I build the house is built. At no point does the house need to be built again, barring any massive disaster. Fundraising is not that. You cannot say, I have an individual giving program because I reached out to an individual donor, therefore I'm done with this. It's much like fitness. You can't go into the gym and spend 30 minutes on the treadmill and then say, my cardiovascular workout is done and I am done with cardiovascular for the foreseeable future, right? It's all about consistent incremental improvements. The goal is not to create a perfect organization or a perfect individual giving program, but it's to create an improving one. Similarly, we want to really embrace our curiosity versus our expertise. This is especially true when we start thinking about the role board members play in fundraising. We want them to be curious, not experts. So one of the questions I encourage my clients to reflect on is, how can we do more for and with the communities we serve? That's the kind of curiosity we need to drive the work we're doing. Finally, you all know this, but fundraising isn't about asking everyone you can. It's about finding people that connect with the cause and inviting them to join you. So it is not about demanding, it is about inviting people to support your organization. So, what are we talking about when we talk about individual giving? It is the biggest category you could imagine about fundraising. It includes everything from monthly giving to major giving. It's the most common type of charitable donation. It is a gift from an individual to a nonprofit organization. This is the heart of what we do. Individual giving is the source of all sustainable and transformative giving. When we think about those gifts that really change the fate of an organization, that change the direction or the capacity of an organization, those gifts, 9 times out of 10, are from an individual. And individual giving requires the most strategy, the largest amount of outreach, the most significant commitment to relationship building. It's not something, a successful, sustainable individual giving program is not something that can just happen. It's something that only happens when we really think about it and really invest in the individuals that are in our space. So where does it come from? This might be a chart you're familiar with. This is from the 2023 Giving USA report. This chart has been relatively unchanged since the 1980s, wherein you see individuals, in this case, are responsible for 67% of all charitable donations in the US that year. And when you factor in bequests and when you factor in the amount of foundations that are actually family foundations, that number trends closer to 90% of all giving comes from individuals. Please compare that with the corporation slice of the pie, which is always the smallest slice of the pie. Now, I use this slide and this graph in this presentation for a very specific reason. Corporations do an excellent job. In fact, corporations do the best job of telling the story of their philanthropy. And the effect of this storytelling is that you probably have a very lovely board member who at one point has said to you something like this: why don't we just ask Amazon? They have lots of money. Fill in the blank with whatever major corporation of your choice. For me, it was usually Amazon, but Bank of America, Wells Fargo, whatever it is. And sometimes I needed to sit down with my board and show them, I'm pointing at the slide like you can see it, and show them this slide and show them this graph and remind them that corporations are actually responsible for the smallest amount of all the giving. My fundraising mentor told me when I first got started in the business that dead people give away more money than live corporations. This has been true since the 1980s. I have no reason to believe this will stop being true. So when we're trying to make the case for individual giving, the real case is that's where the money is. If your board is hemming and hawing, this is how we can get them to come to the table with us, to come on this journey with us. I can talk in another presentation about the benefits of corporate giving, why corporate giving is a really smart thing to invest in, but it is not the powerhouse. Individuals are the powerhouse. Individuals is what's going to make your mission sing. So when we're thinking about where does giving come from, it comes from individuals. So when we start talking about individual giving, we want to start talking about donor discovery. How do we find these donors? Unfortunately, there's several myths that we run into. Side note, I need to write this presentation again and use a word that I can say more easily than myth, because it's going to be tricky. Here we go. These are some of the myths that I have encountered when it comes to individual giving, and these may be familiar to you too. First off, if you want to find individual donors, you've got to look for rich people, right? We've all heard that. I've actually been directed to do that. I'll share that story later today. Nonprofits might say, well, we don't have any major donors. There's no one in our database who can give a major gift. We're going to talk about that, why that's also untrue. A nonprofit leader might say, well, we can't ask our volunteers for money. We can't do that. They're already giving us so much of their time. Or let's just call Bill Gates. Let's just call one rich person and have them save us and do all this stuff. So what I want to do is kind of look into some of these myths. Oh, I want to look into some of these misconceptions. There it is, and address how we really want to approach them. So, for example, when someone says the key to donor discovery is to look for rich people, what we really want to have is a better and broader definition of donor discovery. Donor discovery, as you know, is a series of tactics and strategies that we use to identify potential supporters. Not all connections we make in a donor discovery outreach is going to lead to a gift. As a sidebar, I'll say, when we're thinking about donor discovery, finding out that someone is not aligned with our mission is a very positive thing to find out. You only have so many hours in the day. And I don't want you as a fundraiser spending time trying to build a relationship with someone who is fundamentally unaligned with your mission. So getting a no in the discovery phase is actually a really, really good thing. In donor discovery, in these conversations we want to have, in this research we want to do, we want to focus on values alignment, not on capacity. So this is where that find rich people idea, we have to really put that to the test. First off, unless you have a really good researcher on staff and a really good suite of wealth screening programs, you're going to be pretty bad at finding capacity. It's difficult to do. I worked in Orange County for many, many years, which is a community with a really out of control real estate market. So when I was doing donor discovery in Orange County with a wealth screening tool, I was getting a ton of what I would call false millionaires back. They would be like, "Oh, this person can give you a multi-million dollar gift." I'm like, "Whoa, they can't," because what it's really showing you is they've lived in this house since the 80s. The value of their home has skyrocketed. It doesn't really tie to their generosity. It doesn't tie to their giving patterns. It doesn't tie to their cash. And most importantly, it doesn't tie to their connection with the mission. A millionaire who doesn't care about your mission is worth nothing to you. It doesn't matter. What matters is how close are they to the mission. So I hope some of my clients think about it by looking at this little circle chart on the slide. And you can see the organization is kind of down there in the center. And what I encourage my clients to do is to start with the people who are closest. Who are your current donors? Who are your current volunteers? Who are your lapsed donors? Who are the people who may be connected to the mission because of other involvement with community agencies, with other ways you can find that alignment? That's what you want to really work on before you start like looking for strangers. I'll share a quick story. I was at a nonprofit, and the local business journal put out a list of the 100 wealthiest people in the county. And my executive director gave me that list and said, I want you to send a letter to all of these people about our mission and ask them to support us. Now, I will give you a million space bucks if you can guess how much money I raised sending a cold letter to people based simply on the fact that they were rich. I'm seeing some zeros. Yes, Blake, thank you. Yeah, it didn't work. It didn't work. And we know these things don't work. So if we need to adjust our expectations for donor discovery and move away from a capacity mindset and move toward an alignment mindset, it's not about finding rich people. It's about finding people who care. And the reason, I should say this too, the reason looking for wealth capacity is so difficult is because people can give in multiple ways. Gifts of cash, gifts of assets, gifts of their passion. One of my favorite board members of all time was not a particularly wealthy individual, but was someone who gave personally, who secured corporate giving, who secured giving from his church, who was an ambassador to us in multiple channels. He was worth his weight in gold. And a simple wealth screening would not have shown that. But because I knew he had a passion for what we were doing, we were able to cultivate his relationship and keep finding more and more ways for him to support us. That was developing an individual giver. Your organization or an organization might say, we don't have any major donors. Well, first off, let's be really clear. The term major donor is a term of art, meaning there's no standard definition for what a major donor is. I've worked for shops where a major donor was someone who could give a six-figure gift. And I've worked for shops where a major donor was someone who could give in $1,000. Many times your organization is going to define what a major donor is. I will share that I recently heard at the AFP Icon conference, some organizations are defining major donor based on how the gift feels to the donor, which I think is a really interesting way to look at that. Like a donor who can write a check for $100, that's $100 is not a major gift to that donor if they can just give it kind of at whim or as needed. So I think that might be hard to measure, but it's an interesting way to kind of think about this when we're in the trenches here. But your major gifts vary on the size of the institution, and really, major donor is just a way to categorize individuals that you, as the fundraising lead, are going to give extra time and attention to. So yes, if you are sitting there thinking in your head, a major donor is someone who can write a check for $1 million, you might not know anybody who can do that. You might, but you might not, and that's okay. Major donors in the individual giving space, a major donor is someone we're going to spend extra time with. We're going to we're going to really personalize and customize our outreach to them. Now, in a perfect world, we would give all of our donors the same level of love and attention, but this is where we are. You only have so many hours in the day. You have a lot of things being asked of you. So from a prioritization point of view, major donors are a special thing we look at. When we're talking to board members or boards and bosses about the difference between a major donor and an individual donor, or I'm sorry, an annual donor, I often like to use the food analogy that annual giving donors, the donors who maybe respond to a direct marketing appeal or a day of giving campaign, they are often ordering off the menu. We're giving them a few choices, they're selecting off the choices. But our donors in the major giving category, we're making something special for them. We're creating something special for them. So again, if you think you don't have major donors, let's be really clear as to how you're defining a major donor. And if you're not sure what constitutes a major donor in your gift, spend some time in your CRM and see what your average gift size is for donors. That's a good way to start drawing that map for yourself. We can't ask our volunteers to give. We have individuals in our database, but they're all volunteers, and we can't ask them to give, or else they'll be mad and they'll stop giving. Well, that's not true. First off, that was kind of bold, but here it is. Your board members are volunteers too, and we are asking our board members to give. If you're not asking your board members to give, let me say, you need to be asking your board members to give. 100% of your board members must be giving to your organization. There's reasons for that, which we can delve into, but the short version is I wouldn't eat at a restaurant if the head chef at the restaurant wouldn't eat there either. If your board members are super involved with this mission, if they're really connected with this mission and they don't choose to give, that is a different conversation. Back to volunteers. 2023 Bank of America study of philanthropy, charitable giving by affluent households. You'll see that people who volunteer are more likely to give to charity than those who do not volunteer. And the median gift by volunteers is nearly 4 times than that of non-volunteers. That's a long way of saying people who volunteer volunteer because they love the mission. If we're inviting people to give, we're inviting them to give because we think they love the mission. So let's make that happen. Now, I will say that any outreach you do to a volunteer should recognize the fact that they are a volunteer. Your volunteers are probably known to you. So when you have conversations with them about their giving, about the ways they can continue to support the organization, you want to be personal in those messages. We want them to know that we know who they are. Also, as a side note, I'd love to call attention to this little piece of stock photos I'm using where people are putting unlabeled cans into a box, which is going to be a real kind of surprise for someone getting that food box. I should pick a better photo. Sorry. Finally, let's call Bill Gates. Let's pick one rich person and ask them to solve all of our problems. No, instead, we want to create a prospect list. We have prospects in our organizations. We need to organize them. We need to put them all on paper, and we need to use this list to guide our actions as fundraisers. A prospect list is an absolutely critical part of your fundraising strategy. If you are a full-time fundraiser, or if you are managing full-time fundraisers, or if you're an executive director, you should have a prospect list. My experience has been, and your mileage may vary, but my experience has been having about 100 names is a good place to start for a prospect list. More than 100, it's going to get a little wonky. Less than 100, you're probably not pulling deep enough. I also, when I was leading a fundraising team, I would have my fundraising team members have a focus group or a active management group of about 20 to 25 names. The reason I would do this is because many of our donors give cyclically or seasonally. So there's times of the year where we really want to be engaged and locked into a relationship with someone and maybe less so with others. So this also gives you an opportunity to continually review, revise, update your prospect list. People shouldn't get on your prospect list and stay there forever and ever. Now, a bit of clarification, I call it a prospect list, but it is a list of current, past, and prospective or potential supporters. So board members, volunteers, current year donors, last year donors, 3 years ago donors, people that you've met in the community you think could become donors, event attendees, all of these personas can populate your prospect list. Your prospect list process should be automated wherever possible. This is where you really want to get to know your CRM. I know I always liked it when I could kind of tag individuals in my donor database and then click of a button, run a report that would show me all sorts of great information about them. I would love to run a report that would show first, last, and largest, the first gift they made, the last gift they made, and the largest gift they made, both in terms of amount and date and mission or program. That's a great little snapshot to see like, oh, like let's talk about Sally and what is Sally really interested in and how much has Sally given, a word of caution here, you can really get kind of in the weeds on this and start really like building a bigger and bigger and bigger report. Um, you have to find that balance for yourself. I could tell for me when I was starting to avoid the emotionally scary work of calling donors. It's when I started really adding more and more columns to a prospect list report. I'm like, oh, I'm avoiding this. Same reason why I would clean my dorm room instead of studying for finals. It's like I got to get this energy out somewhere. I'm scared to do a thing. Our prospect lists are used to prioritize and record our outreach and follow-up methodology. So prioritize. This is really important. As fundraisers, there's a million things that are on your plate currently. There's things in the wings. There's things going to get emailed to you. There's, you know, great ideas from well-meaning boards and bosses for things for you to investigate and try. If you are serious about individual giving, you need to be talking to individuals. Like that's the long and the short of it. And what that really means is we sometimes need to reprioritize our day and say, like, okay, what's the most important thing I can do today? I need to call 5 donors and do my follow-up work with them. I need to call 5 donors to thank them for their last gift. I need to call whatever it is. Your prospect list is the way you can help that prioritization get some framework. And recording, we have to record the outcomes of the work we're doing, right? So when you're meeting a donor for coffee, when you're taking a donor to lunch, when you're having a Zoom call or a phone call with a donor, the results of that call, that meeting need to go in your donor database. I would tell my staff members that if you had a great meeting, but you didn't write it down, you didn't have a meeting. Um, and we'll talk about this again when it comes to goal setting. It's really important. It's important for two reasons. One, this is a gift for the fundraiser to come. The fundraiser that's going to sit in your chair at some point in the future, you want them to be able to sit down and understand the nature of the relationship between the donor and the organization. But also, it's because the last thing we want is our donors to have an interaction with the organization and feel like they're a stranger when they should feel like they're a regular. And having this record of the work they've done with us, the questions they've had, the involvement they've had, helps us make sure um, that real rich nature of the relationship is recorded and reflected. So when we're thinking about our prospect list, I toyed with the idea of putting like a quote unquote sample prospect list in this presentation, but I really think you all know this stuff, so I'm not going to get into the weeds. There's not a silver bullet magic thing where like this is the way to do it. It's whatever way works for you. What what really makes a prospect list a functioning prospect list and makes it different than just a list of names is for every name on your prospect list, you should have an understanding and a clear explanation of what you want to do next with or for that individual. Whether it's saying, I need to call Sally in the next 90 days to invite her to the event, or whether it's, I need to follow up because we had a lunch on Tuesday and now it's Thursday and I'm going to follow up and see if they had any more questions, or whether it's a thank you call or a solicitation meeting or whatever it is, it needs to be on that list. There needs to be a way for you to look at that list and say, oh yeah, here's what we need to do. Otherwise, we're just creating a list of names. And a list of names is helpful, but doesn't drive us to action. And that's the other thing. A individual giving program is an active thing. You're going to be actively building relationships with individuals. This is how we're going to get there. So how do we build the prospect list? Well, we start much like that. You remember the donor discovery chart. We start in the center. We start with the people that are already in our CRM. These are some of the tools I use to decide if someone should be on or not on a particular prospect list. Probably the most common is looking at dollars given. But even in that category, there's a lot of different ways you can look at that. You can look at it and say, how much has an individual given in their lifetime? How much has an individual given in a single gift? How much is an individual given in a single fiscal year? Again, whatever it is, you want to measure it. You want to be able to pull it out of the CRM, and this can especially help you if you don't have a prospect list right now and you're thinking about how to build one. Like, okay, computer, show me anyone who's given us $500 or more in their life, and you come back with 10,000 names. You're like, oh, that's too much. So show me anyone who's given me $10,000 in their life. Oh, and all of a sudden the names, the field is getting smaller and smaller. The number of gifts, not the amount, but the number of gifts is also a really important metric to watch. Someone who has given a large number of gifts, and what large is going to depend on your organization, but someone who has given monthly for multiple years, that individual has to be on somebody's prospect list because that's showing engagement. And ultimately, all of these metrics on this slide are ways to try to get our arms around how do we identify engagement, how do we codify engagement and put it on paper for us. Event attendance, volunteer hours or volunteer status. They're on a committee, they're on a board. These are all things that are showing us this individual has raised their hand and is very interested in what we do. And if they are raising their hand and expressing this interest, we want to make sure they're on a prospect list. We want to make sure that we are actively cultivating that relationship. Now, I did talk to Matt at MonkeyPod to see like, hey, this is a MonkeyPod sponsored event here. Does MonkeyPod do this stuff? And he said, yes, they do this stuff. So that's as pitchy as it's going to get. But if your CRM is not letting you look up things like who's given the most number of gifts, who's given the most amount of dollars, who's been a donor for the longest amount of time, if you've got a CRM that's not letting you do that, I'm sure if you give Matt a call, he'll have some great advice for you because your CRM needs to do that. I tell clients all the time, fundraising is an art and a science. This is the science part. Building this prospect list is the science part. How you work with each of those names on that list, that's the art of it. So if your board wants to invest in individual giving, and if your board is maybe withholding or not super excited about investing in a CRM, you're really going to be hard to have one without the other. So CRM. Okay, did I have? Okay, yes. Here we go. So let's talk a little bit, and I keep saying talk. I'm doing the talking. Let's listen for a little bit about goals. You probably all have a sheet of goals. I know I've worked for organizations where I've had like 15 goals assigned to me, and it gets a little scary. But I believe there are three kind of core goals we need to have on our plate in order to measure the success for an individual giving program. Now, having clear and actionable goals is a really important part of your fundraising toolbox. And it's important for a couple reasons. Not only is it important because you want to be able to track your progress and tell your story, but it's also, I'll say this because we're all friends, there's an element of playing defense that we need with some of these goals. When I started working for Habitat for Humanity of Orange County, the fundraising committee of the board only would use a prior month report from the accounting team to talk about the success of fundraising. So at the April meeting, they would say, here's what you did in March. It didn't tell the story of the work that was being done. It didn't tell the story of what fundraising really is, which of course we know fundraising isn't just the ask. It's the cultivation, it's the stewardship, it's all the work we do. So building goals around not only solicitation, but cultivation and stewardship help prepare our board members to be better champions for fundraising, better fundraisers themselves. Again, goals can show our progress as well as tell the bigger fundraising story. So the first goal, the goal tied, I think, most to cultivation, is tracking the number of donor meetings. When I was leading a fundraising team, every fundraiser would have a goal around the number of meetings I wanted them to be having in a given month. Now, some definitions in order here. When I say meeting, pre-2020, I meant meeting face-to-face. Post-2020, Zoom is acceptable. A phone call, maybe, but it has to be a really meaningful phone call. The phone call you make to set up the lunch doesn't count as the meeting. The lunch counts as the meeting. Sitting with a VP or a community organizer or a community leader at a state of the city event, sitting with them at a 8 top or 10 top table, that probably is not going to count as a meeting because it's unlikely you're going to have a meaningful conversation with the person at that occasion. Now, setting up the next coffee meeting one-on-one with that person, that's your meeting. So meetings are usually one-on-one or small group, and they add to the relationship. We know more about the individual and they know more about us. We understand more about this individual's philanthropic priorities. We understand more about this individual's relationship with this mission. These things are important. A shorthand way of doing it that I would tell my team, I would say, if you are unsure if this counts as, quote, a meeting or not, think if you would take the time to knock on my office door. Again, this is pre-2020. If you would knock on my office door and tell me about this meeting. If you would come into your boss's office and say, "Boss, I just talked to Sally. Her favorite color is green, and we're going to have lunch in 3 weeks." I'm like, "All right, that's cool, but maybe come back to me in 3 weeks when you have the lunch." That's probably the most important thing. So having a goal around this data point speaks to the work you're doing, speaks to the cultivation you're doing with your donors. And again, if you have an individual giving program, you need to be meeting with individuals. And if you're not, you're in trouble. Also, this is important because from a leadership point of view, if I see a team that has really high numbers when it comes to the number of meetings, but really low numbers when it comes to dollars raised, that tells me they're meeting but not asking. Like, oh, okay. Now here's an adjustment we need to make, right? It's not you guys aren't doing the job well. It's now I'm have a little more specific I can be in moving our cause forward. If you're not sure where to start, take out your calendar and look at your personal activity over the past 2 or 3 months. How many meetings have you held? Use that as your starting point and set that goal. The second goal is dollars raised versus budget. I don't need to go into this in any real detail. You guys know this. This is the heart of what we do. But your fundraising responsibility is to know this number, right? You got to know what's my number, what's the budget, where am I year to date, where am I, actual, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes knowing this number, some of your CRMs will be your accounting software as well. So there's a lot of good synergy. I've never worked for a place that had that. It was always a fundraising system and an accounting system, and then a great reckoning between the two. So you need to be friends with your controller or your CFO and make sure you know what the real number is. Make sure things are being counted the right way. Um, this is if you're not tracking this number now, please do so. It's a great number to track. But again, if you can, if as a leader in the nonprofit space, if you are seeing this number trend low, then that tells you what kind of adjustments you need to make. And obviously, we'll go into that in a minute. Third big goal, donor retention rate. Again, many of you are probably already tracking this, but when it comes to individual giving, donor retention rate is absolutely critical because this is telling us how successful are we at keeping our donors and keeping them continually engaged with the mission. If I see a nonprofit organization with high dollars raised and a high number of meetings per month and a low retention rate, that means they are not doing stewardship well. They're bringing donors in, and donors are feeling ignored and not making a second gift and moving on. And nationally, this is a downward trend. Nationally, organizations are doing really poorly when it comes to donor retention, which means anything you can do, any stewardship you can do is going to be remarkable, and your donors are going to totally respond to it. You get a board member to make a thank you call, guaranteed that donor has never had a board member thank them for their gift before. So you can really make some interesting gains here in your individual giving strategy. This definitely requires CRM tracking. Some CRMs will track this for you, and it'll be on your dashboard. It'll be really easy to see. If you don't know what it is, you should find out. And there's formulas. I wasn't going to put these in the chat, but you can Google donor retention formula, some really simple math, and you can calculate it. And it's a really important number to find. You might be saying, but I'd love more goals because I love goals and that's the kind of day we're having. So here's some more goals. This is like your B team of goals. Like you've got your big three. That's what you want to lead with. You want those locked and loaded. Really, you want those in place. If you want others, there's other ways you can measure the engagement and the connection individual donors are having with your organization. The response rate to any direct marketing or campaigns you're having, that's a really important goal. Special events, this is probably a whole nother conversation, but if measuring net income for special events is obviously important. I also challenge you and challenge organizations to take a look at attendee behavior post-event. If you've got someone who's coming to your gala, and then ideally in the next 11 months, you are giving them other opportunities to engage with your mission. If they're not taking those opportunities, that's an interesting conversation to have. Are they not interested? Are we not asking? Are they not asking the right way? And the reason I use this particular metric is because if too many of your event attendees are only coming to and giving to that event, you are effectively planning a party for these people. Maybe that's okay with you. Maybe you have other things you'd rather be doing, and there's other things we could do. So that's a sidebar. That's my soapbox on events. We'll talk about that later. Board giving rate, it should be 100%. Absolutely should be 100%. If it's not 100%, you need to, again, treat our board members like individuals and have those sit downs with them. I'll say as a sidebar, when we're talking about board giving, sometimes the concept of a board give or get policy comes into play. I recommend the language meaningful personal gift come into play, that every board member be asked to make a meaningful and personal gift to the organization. Putting a number down might make people feel like you're selling the board seat or that they can't make that gift. Meaningful personal gives you some leeway there. You can dig in if you got someone on your team who really loves the data, turn them loose. Like, what's your donor retention rate based on first gift or channel or giving type? You can really get some interesting stories out of that data. If you've got a monthly giving program, how many upgrades are you getting a year? How are you challenging people to do that? Finally, and this is usually out of the control of our frontline fundraisers, but employee retention rate. I think it's time we start lumping employee retention rate, especially fundraising employee retention rate when it comes to fundraising success. Because I don't care how good you are, if you can't keep your fundraisers in the building, your mission is always going to be underfunded. You're always going to be in this starvation cycle. That's more for boards, but I'm practicing saying it. So when I talk to boards, I have it. Okay, a few final thoughts, and then we're going to pause for questions. And this is kind of our general thesis statement of the day. Your individual giving program should be personalized and specific. So personalized cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship messages and opportunities. What do I mean by that? That means less dear friend and more dear Sally. That means less, we're going to invite all of our donors to this event, and more, I'm calling 2 people up and we're going to take a tour of our facility and meet with our programs team. I'm calling 1 person up and we're going to have lunch on Thursday. And I'm going to talk to them and ask them about their connection with our mission. I'm not thinking about a massive amorphous blob. I'm thinking about individuals and how they connect with what we do. And specific, both in terms of amount and impact. I know a lot of the fundraisers on this call know this already, but there's a huge difference between Sally, I'd love for you to support our mission this year. And Sally, I'd love for you to consider a gift of $1,000 to support our mission this year. Specific. And impact too, this gets back to stewardship, which is how we build our donor retention rate, telling those stories of impact, to our donors so they understand the role they play in this cause. Your individual giving strategy should be clear, consistent, compassionate, curious. I am a sucker for alliteration, and so this kind of came to me. Clear. We want to have bold and direct conversations with your supporters, conversations that reflect your values. I hate to say it because this was a tired phrase, but I'll say it now more than ever. Now more than ever, it is important that donors understand very clearly who we are, what we stand for, and why we're doing this work. Because that's going to show them why they belong with us. It's not about need. It's not about the federal government acting like maniacs. It is about the mission we're called to do and the work we're going to do together. That clear, bold conversation. Consistent. Single email doesn't make a strategy. If you're new to this part of the work, if you're new to individual donor outreach, get ready to leave a lot of voicemails. Get ready to leave texts and voicemails and emails, and get ready to feel ghosted. And all I can say is you've got to know that that ghosting is part of the process. That ghosting is not a reflection on you or your professionalism or skill. It's something because it takes time to build trust with individuals. That's why consistency is important. That's why compassion is important. Have compassion for yourself and for your supporters in this. I tell the story often of when I moved here to Tacoma, I was on the phone with AT&T trying to get wireless set up. If you've been on the phone with AT&T, you have a sense of what my mood was like. which was just short of murderous. And all I could think of was like, if a nonprofit I loved and admired called me at that moment, I would not answer the phone. I would not reply for no fault of their own, but because I was dealing with AT&T. So that donor that's ghosting you, it's probably not ghosting you. They're probably, they had a pipe burst, they have a sick dog, a kid just won an award, who knows? Things are happening. Be compassionate with yourself in this work and be curious. Learn about your supporters. Ask questions about their connection with the mission. Ask questions about the other charities they support. Learn about them. That is how we build trust, and trust is how we build relationships, and relationships are how we build donors. If you're going into donor meetings feeling like your job is to report out about the organization, you're missing the boat. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, before I stop, we're going to get back to this. So in the presentation, you'll see contact information for me, all the different places you could find me. I'd love to talk more if you have questions, and all the different places you can find Matt from MonkeyPod. He'd love to talk to you too. So we're going to stop sharing and open for questions. I think we have 10 minutes left. So that's pretty good timing for me. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns, takeaways.
And
Anything anything you'd like to ask?
I was just gonna say, folks, you can now unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question in real time. Also, you can feel free to use the Q&A. We did send out a short survey before this that a couple of you responded to. So one thing that I think came out from that, Chris, that I might pitch to you is
Yeah.
prospecting tips and tricks without paying for any outside resources. You kind of referenced wealth screening tools before, and I think that
Mm.
the price tag on those is often pretty intimidating to folks. But what are
Yeah.
some of the tips and tricks that you use? What are some of the data points you're looking at?
Yeah, well screening is a very specific tool for a very specific need. And generally speaking, I'd say what it requires is a large volume of data.
Mm,
So that's why I most often see it employed by universities and hospitals. So
mm,
um, to that end, I'd say, okay, start with your CRM. Who do you already know? If there are other databases where an individual data is being collected, like maybe your volunteers are being collected somewhere else, that's a good place to start too. Start close. Start really close to your organization. There's also an element here of really working with your board members and committee members and other really engaged volunteers and engaging them in asset mapping conversations, which is a phrase I don't love, but I haven't figured out a new one yet. But figuring out who these individuals know, and that's a whole another kettle of fish. But really, if you don't have a CRM, you probably have something where you're collecting the names of people who are visiting your organization, that are visiting your website, that are on your mailing list. Like really think and kind of get into the weeds about how is data flowing into your organization and how can you look into that. If you don't know, and again, if we're taking capacity out of the equation here, again, what we're trying to look for is signs that indicate engagement. So length of time, response rates, event attendance, volunteer hours. These are all things that these are all ways people are showing that they are interested in what you're doing. So I would start there.
that's great insight there. And I will say that sort of principle is a big part of the philosophy of how we designed MonkeyPod, was really meant to be a CRM that tracks all that data. So we don't want you to have a separate volunteer database because MonkeyPod can be your volunteer database, right? And that way you can see who are your most engaged volunteers. Are they making donations? If they're not, those are probably good people to add to your prospect list. Same with email engagement and event attendance and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, a +1 to all that, Chris. That's definitely something that we've seen as well. Any other questions from the group? Blake, yeah, please go ahead.
Sure. I was typing it, but it might just be easier to ask. So we are I work for Easter Seals National. And so we
Okay.
have a large group
Yeah.
of donors, probably tens of thousands,
Yeah.
that have been habituated to giving via direct response.
Hmm.
And oftentimes as a result or in because they are going to receive some kind of premium. And so I'm trying to figure out essentially how we can grow those people, kind of move them out of that kind of transactional giving and into a more meaningful, individualized giving plan. Ultimately, maybe getting them to what we call our President's Club, which would be $1,000 a year.
Okay, yeah. It's tricky. A lot of organizations really struggle with that problem. Maybe not to the scale that Easter Seals has, but um, one a couple things you could explore. You could explore doing some donor surveys, um, wherein this might be something you're already doing, but wherein you are asking questions of these donors about their connection with the mission, their satisfaction. Donor surveys can also be a good way to identify people who might be interested in making a bequest gift to the organization, or I want to learn more about that. So that might be a way. What you kind of want to do is try to figure out a way, how can you get out of all the hundreds of tens of thousands of people, how can we narrow that field down to someone who's raising their hand? So
Mhm.
a lot of it is consistency, and a lot of it is, making the call and owning up front that this is new behavior. Like, I know you've been a donor for 10 years, and I'm ashamed to say we've never had a face-to-face conversation, but
Hmm.
I'm going to be in your neighborhood, or I'm making the rounds right now and I'm talking to our most generous donors, not asking them for anything, but learning their story about why they came to us. Why do they give? What about the mission effects? You want to be really upfront with your intentions, because oftentimes donors are like, well, no, I don't want, I already give. Don't talk to me about this.
Mhm.
I've even had that while making thank you calls, people trying to hang up on me. I learned to say thank you in like the first two words. But it's gonna require some real consistent messages around this topic. Maybe it's like there's some email messages you can send saying, hey, you're going to hear from us in the next 10 days. And this is what we're going to ask you. And this is what you can do. Like, it's going to be, we're asking for a 15-minute Zoom call. And these are the questions we're asking you. Like, as much as because I think one of the challenges fundraisers in our head, we know how we want that conversation to go, but our donors have probably never had that conversation, and they don't know, and they're scared, and they're like, well, what do you mean we're going to meet for coffee? Like, for
Mhm.
what? So get out, like, get in front of it, and be really clear. Like, the more I can learn from donors like you, the better our outreach can be for donors in the future. And you're helping us raise more money by sharing your story with me. So consistent, clear, consistent. That's probably the best path.
Pro- Probably some, from what I'm hearing, probably also some patience as
Oh,
well on
absolutely.
myself
I couldn't find
as
a patience synonym that started with C, so I left it out. But yeah, patience.
thanks,
Constancy. Who
Chris.
knows? Yeah.
Great question, Blake. Thank you for that. Any other questions from the group here? I know we're coming up against the end of the hour here, so
Yes,
great. Thank
Kendall.
you for joining us, Elisa. Oh yeah, Kendall, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. So I work for a theater festival in New York City, and we're every January. What
Okay.
I'm finding is difficult is engaging with potential donors now. Sort of when we haven't announced the program, we're really far out. So I'm just wondering when we're sort of stuck to our bulk of our activity is 2 weeks in January,
Hmm.
how to keep that momentum and also like the goals. So, I know that people will give around January or when they're buying tickets, but sort of how to make goals realistic throughout the year, I guess, looking at
Hmm.
an annual plan.
For goals, I mean, I've lost to this argument with CFOs throughout my whole career, but I tend to like to set goals based on donor past behavior, and to be able to say, like, look, the donors traditionally give in this pattern. I think I can get them maybe a little higher, but I don't want to go crazy. So using their past behavior as your guide, as like where to start things. It sounds like, Kendall, what might be interesting is, I mean, theater is an interesting thing because it's such like such an experience
Mm.
that we're raising money for. So, but it's also something people have some very passionate thoughts about. Like, I don't think anyone's casually giving to you. Like, they're giving to you because this theater is really important to them. So maybe telling stories throughout the year about the process, like how do you, and you might already be doing this, I apologize, but how do you
No,
get the shows on their feet up until, like,
yeah.
what's happening right now? Um, are there, you could literally do. what are your backstage, what's happening backstage right now? And can you offer backstage tours for people to come in and see where the show is going to happen? Are there ways that they can, donors love to give advice too. So if there's an opportunity to be like, I don't know if I worked with a youth theater and, we could ask the donors to be like, hey, share some positive vibes or some positive thoughts for our young actors on opening night. Like some, so some of that, like getting them involved in the process. But I don't think I think you've got an interesting challenge. January is a tough time too, just in terms of like you're right up against the holidays and it's winter and like all those things. But I'm sure the theater doesn't spring fully to life over 1 week, right? So
right.
getting the donors to see this story that they're a part of because they're donors. So getting to see the story of how you get to this point could help you.
Right. Thank you.
I'll piggyback on that. I think of this a little bit more through like the marketing lens than rather the direct fundraising lens, given my role. But I think to echo what Chris said, just finding opportunities to keep people engaged. The thought that immediately came to mind was like, can you send out like a survey that asks people like what their favorite show they've attended, what type of shows they're interested in seeing, is there a playwright that should be on your radar or something like that? I don't know if that data is like even super helpful, but I feel like it's a way to get people engaged. It's a way to keep them top of mind. And I love the behind the scenes stuff too. I think that's a great idea. I also love Bill's suggestion here of if you send out a survey to your existing donors and say, hey, can we tell us a story about why you donated? And then can we use that as a way to communicate with our other donors?
Yeah.
I'm sure you can get some wonderful stories of the positive impact you all have made for the
Tell us
community.
the story of the first play you saw.
Yeah.
Were you in a play? Were you in a play? I bet you've got a lot of high school drama folks in your list. Like,
Yeah.
what was the first play you performed in? Like, again, engaging them in the community that you're part of could be
Yeah.
interesting.
Hi, I'm Jesus Sanchez from Los Angeles. We publish a neighborhood community news site. And you had mentioned that there are seasonal patterns to giving, and I understand that there's a lot of giving toward the end of the year. But what other seasonalities do you see or that we might take advantage of?
Yeah, thank you, Jesus. That's a good. Let me clarify that a little bit. Your organization might have seasonality to it. Like when I was at Habitat, I knew there were some donors that gave right around a certain event. So I knew like, okay, they most want to hear about leading up to and right after the event. So the kind of 3 months in the middle, I could move them off my active prospect list. So what you can do, another way to use the data, look at when the donors' gifts are coming in. And so if you've got a handful of donors that always give in October, just to pick a date, well, that means like late summer, you want to make sure you're talking to these people and really engaging with them and really like that might be your target. It might be less important to be in front of them in like February, March, July, August. Yeah, I think that might be good. So looking at when the donors gave can give you some interesting information as well.
Great. Bill, I don't want to pick on you, but I saw you pulled off mute for a moment there. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
No, I was actually going to just piggyback on the fact of the comment that I made in the comments that we actually have started to write letters to our monthly donors, asking them why they're engaged with us and what brought them to us. And then we were going to be able to say, can we use these as part of the bigger picture of our education of our donor base as to how they can also become a monthly donor.
Love that, Bill. Yeah. Yeah. Great use of engagement and cultivation. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know we are just over the hour here. Any other final questions before we wrap up here? Cool. Well, thank you all for joining us. It was wonderful to have such an engaged group and meet some of you, see some of you again. Stay tuned. We'll be offering more webinars and other sessions like this. And as Chris and I have both mentioned, if there's anything we can do to help, whether from the software side or more direct conversations about fundraising and how to do it, we'd love to talk more with you. So we'll be sure to send a follow-up email and would love to hear from you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.